10 names, 10 Motown artists who did not live to see what their music became, and a pattern, running beneath every one of those stories, that the most powerful record label in the history of Black American music spent decades hoping you would never put together. This is their story, told properly, finally. Number 10, Tammi Terrell. Before I tell you what Motown did while Tammi Terrell was dying, I need to tell you who she was before any of that, because that is the part that makes everything else land the way it should. Thomasina Winifred Montgomery was born in Philadelphia in 1945. She was singing professionally by the time she was 15. She recorded for 3 labels before she turned 20, when Berry Gordy signed her in 1965 and renamed her Tammi Terrell. She had already lived more of a musical life than most artists ever get. She brought something into the studio that Motown had not yet found a container for, a voice that could hold joy and grief in the same note. And then Harvey Fuqua put her in a room with Marvin Gaye. What followed was something the charts can measure and the ears can feel, but that words have always struggled to carry. Seven top 40 singles, Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Your Precious Love, You're All I Need to Get By, songs that became permanent fixtures in the emotional lives of millions of people. Tammi Terrell was 22 years old and she was on her way to becoming one of the greatest female voices Motown had ever recorded. And then, on October 14, 1967, she collapsed into Marvin Gaye's arms on a stage in Virginia. She had been having migraines for months. She had ignored them. She collapsed, and doctors diagnosed a malignant tumor on the right side of her brain. She was 22 years old. Now I need you to hold this detail, because what Motown did next tells you everything. The label downplayed the diagnosis. While Tammi Terrell underwent surgery after surgery, she would have 8 before it was over. Motown continued to release material under her name. Some of those later recordings were assembled by laying Marvin Gaye's vocals over sessions she had completed before she got sick. The machine kept running, the product kept coming, and the woman whose voice was on those records was in a hospital bed, losing weight, losing her sight, losing her hair. By early 1970, she weighed 93 pounds and needed a wheelchair. She died on March 16, 1970. She was 24 years old. At her funeral, Tammi Terrell's mother barred everyone from Motown from attending, except for Marvin Gaye, whom she believed was her daughter's genuine friend. She blamed the rest of the label, in her words, for failing to protect her daughter. That is a verdict delivered by a mother at her child's funeral. And it is the kind of thing that stays in the record whether anyone wants it to or not. Tammi Terrell was 24 years old. She had a voice that deserved 40 more years of work. And what comes next on this list is a name that may mean less to you, but it should mean more. Number 9, Shorty Long. Let me tell you who Frederick Earl Long was before I tell you how Motown treated him. Because the contrast between those two things is where the truth lives. Frederick Long was born in Birmingham, Alabama, In 1940, he stood just over 5 feet tall, which is how he came to be known as Shorty. He played piano, organ, drums, harmonica, and trumpet. He wrote songs, he produced records. He was the only Motown artist in the 1960s. Besides Smokey Robinson, who was trusted to produce his own sessions. He hosted the Motown Review. He was one of the most genuinely versatile talents on the label's roster. He wrote Devil with the Blue Dress On in 1964. Not long afterward, a white rock group called Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels covered it, and it became one of the defining rock records of that era. Shorty Long's version went largely unnoticed. And whether the label made a deliberate decision not to push his version with the same force they might have given another artist, I think you already know the answer. If this name was in your house growing up, you already understand exactly what I'm saying. In 1966, he released Function at the Junction. In 1968, Here Comes the Judge reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100. He was 28 years old. He had real hits. He had a sound. He had everything he needed to become something permanent. And then the phone stopped ringing. Marvin Gaye, who we will come to on this list, spoke about Shorty Long in a biography published after his own death. He described him as this beautiful cat who had 2 hits and then got ignored by Motown. Gaye said he fought for artists like Shorty from inside the building. It did not change what happened. There is a thread running through this list. It is not made of song. It is made of what the system decides about who is worth protecting, who is worth promoting, and who is worth remembering. We will follow that thread all the way to the end. On June 29, 1969, Shorty Long and a friend were out on the Detroit River when a freighter's wake capsized their small boat. Both men drowned. He was 29 years old. He died in the same river that runs through the same city that built the machine he had given his talent to, and the machine moved on without a pause. The next name on this list was someone who gave the Temptations everything they had and paid a price that should have been unthinkable. Real talk. Only 9% of you are subscribed. That hurts. We're spending hours digging through archives, fact-checking every detail, bringing these stories back to life. And if you're watching this far, you clearly care. So hit subscribe. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Now, to my subscribers, barely any of you have joined the membership, and honestly, that stings even more. You know the work we put in. You keep coming back. If these videos have ever made you feel something, if this music means something to you, join the membership. It's $1 coffee a month, and it's the only way we keep this going. Let's build this together. All right, back to it. Number 8, Paul Williams. I want to be precise about this one because Paul Williams is not one of the famous Temptations. He is not the one you sing in the shower. He is not the name the documentaries lead with. And that gap between what he gave to that group and how little he is remembered, that gap is its own kind of indictment. Paul Williams was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1939. He was one of the founding members of the Temptations, their original lead singer, and the man who choreographed their stage show, including the routines they built their reputation on. In the years before Motown found them their signature sound, it was Paul Williams' stage presence that held the group together. Members of the group have said he was the best dancer any of them had ever seen. He sang lead on their early records. He sang with a baritone that carried weight the way Southern voices do, from somewhere lower than the chest, somewhere near the roots. And then the hits started coming, and the hits needed a different voice out front. David Ruffin stepped forward. Eddie Kendricks' falsetto became the group's calling card, and Paul Williams, the man who built the foundation, was left to stand at the edge of what he had helped create. That is not a small thing to carry. That landed, I know. Take a second. What Williams carried it with was alcohol. By the late 1960s, he was consuming 2 to 3/5 of Courvoisier a day. He had sickle cell anemia that he had never disclosed to the public. The combination of his illness and his drinking made him increasingly unable to perform. The other Temptations kept oxygen tanks backstage for him. They took turns draining his liquor stashes. They hired another singer to stand behind a curtain and sing his parts while Paul was still on stage. In 1971, a doctor found a spot on his liver. He left the group. He owed more than $80,000 in taxes. His marriage was failing. By early 1973, he was attempting a solo album for Motown, recording sessions at Hitsville. His first single was titled "Feel Like Giving Up." On August 17, 1973, Paul Williams was found dead in his car near 14th Street and West Grand Boulevard in Detroit. A gunshot wound, a gun near his body. His death was ruled a suicide, though his family has always believed the circumstances were more complicated than that. He was 34 years old. He died, essentially, in the shadow of the building that had made him. And the entry that follows this one is a man who stayed loyal to the Temptations until the end, who paid a different kind of price for it. Number 7, Melvin Franklin. Melvin Franklin had one of the deepest voices in the history of popular music. When he sang Old Man River at a Temptations show, grown men went still. When he sang the bass line into a song, you felt it somewhere the music usually can't reach. He was a founding member of the group. He was the last original member standing when the others began to fall. His real name was David English. He was born in Montgomery, Alabama in 1942. He came to Detroit, joined what would become the Temptations, and stayed. Through lineup changes, through member departures and deaths, through decades of Motown's demands, Melvin Franklin stayed. In the late 1960s, he was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. He managed it with cortisone so he could keep performing. The constant use of cortisone compromised his immune system. In the early 1980s, he developed diabetes as a result. He later contracted necrotizing fasciitis, a condition that attacks the body's tissue. He kept performing, and I will say clearly what most people won't. The conditions that wore Melvin Franklin down were not separate from the structure he had spent his career inside. A system that kept artists on the road year after year, that made performance the condition of survival, does not leave the body unmarked. It just does not put its name on what it costs. By the end of 1994, Melvin Franklin had a wheelchair and an oxygen tank waiting for him backstage at every show. His bandmate Otis Williams noticed blood seeping through his sock during a recording session and urged him to stop touring. Franklin stopped performing that July. On February 17, 1995, he suffered a series of brain seizures and was taken to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He never regained consciousness. He died on February 23, 1995. He was 52 years old. He outlived Paul Williams by 22 years. He outlived David Ruffin. He outlived Eddie Kendricks. He was the last man standing, and the ground finally gave way under him too. The Temptations called his voice irreplaceable. They were right. Number 6. Eddie Kendricks. Eddie Kendricks was the first lead tenor of the Temptations. His falsetto was the defining sound of some of the most beloved records Motown ever made. The Way You Do the Things You Do, Get Ready, Just My Imagination, Running Away with Me, a voice as light and precise as a blade. He was born in Union Springs, Alabama, in 1939. He and Paul Williams, who we just spoke about, met as children in a church choir in Birmingham. They came to Detroit together. They helped build the Temptations from nothing. When he left the group in 1971, he had a solo career that produced real hits. Keep On Truckin' went to number 1. Boogie Down reached number 2. He had not finished what he had to give, but Motown's contract system did not leave artists with resources when it was done with them. No royalties from the publishing, no safety net. When his commercial peak passed, there was nothing built beneath him to break the fall. By 1991, he had been diagnosed with lung cancer. He had already had his right lung removed. He was still touring Europe, Japan, whatever the circuit offered, because the circuit was what he had. At the time of his illness and death, Eddie Kendricks did not have health insurance. A founding member of the Temptations, a man whose voice had played in the background of a generation's most private moments. No health insurance. He was also suing Motown Records at the time of his death, claiming royalties owed to him had been withheld for years. He died on October 5, 1992, at Baptist Medical Center in Birmingham, Alabama. He was 52 years old. His friend Bobby Womack organized benefit concerts to help his family with the financial burden. The machine that generated millions on his voice could not provide him with health coverage, and he died pursuing royalties that had never found their way to him. Some of you are going to look this up after this ends. I want you to. That is exactly what should happen. Everything before this point has shown you what neglect looks like, what the system looks like when it doesn't bother to protect what it used. What comes next is the part of this list where the neglect becomes something more deliberate. Hold that distinction. It matters. Number 5. David Ruffin. David Ruffin was the voice of My Girl. He was the voice of Ain't Too Proud to Beg. He was the voice that made the Temptations something the world could not stop listening to. That voice had a quality that is almost impossible to describe without resorting to the obvious. Gritty, soulful, aching, and even those words understate it. He was born in Wynot, Mississippi in 1941. His mother died during his birth. He was raised by a preacher father. He left home at 13. By the time he was 23, he was the lead voice of one of the most commercially successful groups in the world. And then the system began its work on him. Ruffin demanded an accounting of the group's earnings from Motown, a reasonable request from a man who was the most visible face of the label's most successful act. Motown partially agreed, allowing an outside accounting firm to examine the books, but the firm was not given full access to the records held by the group's management division, which was itself a Motown company. He never got the full picture. He left the Temptations in 1968. He had moments of solo success. But the structure that should have protected his earnings, the royalties, the publishing, the post-career income, had never been built in his favor. He spent the 1980s cycling through legal problems, tax evasion charges, drug addiction, and the slow collapse of a man whose earning years had given him nothing permanent to stand on. In 1989, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. 2 years later, he was dead. On June 1, 1991, David Ruffin collapsed in a crack house in Philadelphia. A driver took him to the hospital in a borrowed limousine. He was pronounced dead an hour later. He was 50 years old. He was the voice of My Girl, and he died with $53. Number 4. Marvin Gaye. You know this song. You have known it for as long as you have known music at all. I heard it through the grapevine. What's going on? Let's get it on. The voice of Marvin Gaye is one of the permanent furnishings of the American century. But knowing the song and knowing what it cost to make it are two different kinds of knowing. Let me give you the second one. Marvin Pence Gaye Jr. was born in Washington, D.C. in 1939. He grew up under the authority of a strict, often violent father who was a minister. He escaped through music. He found his way to Detroit. Harvey Fuqua brought him to Berry Gordy. By 1961, he was at Motown, session drummer first. And then he married Berry Gordy's sister Anna, and that marriage entangled his personal life and his professional life into a knot that neither of them fully survived. When the marriage collapsed in the late 1970s, the divorce settlement required that Marvin Gaye hand over the royalties from his next album to his ex-wife. He responded by making the most brutally honest record of his career, a double album called Here My Dear, a track-by-track account of the marriage's collapse. A financial obligation became one of the most raw breakup records ever made. In 1981, Motown edited and mixed his album, In Our Lifetime, without his consent. He left the label. He signed with Columbia Records. He recorded Sexual Healing and won his first Grammy. At the end of 1983, he was living in the house he had purchased for his parents. He was in debt to the IRS for millions. He was deeply addicted to cocaine. He was depressed, paranoid, and by multiple accounts, suicidal. On April 1st, 1984, one day before his 45th birthday, his father shot him. His reported final words, as his brother Frankie held him, "I got what I wanted. I couldn't do it myself, so I made him do it." He was 44 years old, and the structure he had spent 2 decades inside, one that had entangled his personal life with the label's business, that had claimed the royalties of his most raw work, that had left him with nearly $9 million in debt despite a career that generated hundreds of millions, that structure deserves to be part of the story. Not as the whole explanation, but as the honest context. Marvin Gaye deserved to record for 20 more years. He deserved to be free of what he carried. Number 3. Georgeanna Tillman Gordon. And if this name is new to you, I want you to stay with me here, because this is the one that tells you how far back the pattern goes. This is the one that proves this was not a series of accidents. This was a system. Georgeanna Tillman was born in Inkster, Michigan, in 1944. She was 17 years old when her high school friend Gladys Horton asked her to join an unnamed singing group. They practiced, they auditioned, and on the strength of a song they brought to the audition, a song written by a girl who left the group before the first record was even pressed. The Marvelettes were signed to Motown. The song was Please Mr. Postman. In November 1961, Please Mr. Postman became Motown's first #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100. The record that put Hitsville, USA on the national map. Georgeanna Tillman sang on that record. She sang on 13 Marvelette singles. She was one of the founding voices of a group that opened the door for every woman who would follow her onto that label. By 1963, she had been diagnosed with lupus. She had also had sickle cell anemia since childhood. The Motown Revue, the grueling touring circuit that Motown ran its acts through year after year, was not designed with the health of its artists as a primary concern. The constant rehearsals, the relentless performance schedule, the demands of the road, her doctor told her it was making her sicker. She left the group in 1965. She stayed at Motown as a secretary until they moved to Los Angeles in 1972, and she was no longer needed. Then she moved back to her mother's house in Inkster. She died there on January 6, 1980, 1 month before what would have been her 36th birthday. Complications of lupus and sickle cell anemia. No monument, no ceremony. Just a woman who had given Motown its first #1 hit, dying at 35 in the house she grew up in, almost entirely forgotten. Some of you just got quiet. That is the right response. This name deserves to be in your memory after today. Number 2, Mary Wells. You know this song. It has been part of your life for a long time, maybe since before you could name it, My Guy. A #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1964. The record that made the Beatles ask her to tour with them. The record that announced to the world that Motown had found something that could not be ignored. But knowing the song and knowing what Mary Wells paid to make it, those are two different things. And you deserve the second one. Mary Esther Wells was born in Detroit in 1943. She survived spinal meningitis as a child. She was 17 years old when she walked into Motown and sang Berry Gordy, a song she had written for Jackie Wilson. Gordy signed her the next day. She was Motown's first established star, the first to appear on American Bandstand for the label. The first Motown artist the label sent overseas. She was called the Queen of Motown, and she earned that title through work that helped define what the label's sound was going to be. In 1964, on the day she turned 21, she exercised her legal right to void her Motown contract as a minor. She left. She signed a big money deal elsewhere. She never had another top 10 hit. And here is what leaving Motown in 1964 actually meant. She left behind everything. Every song she had recorded was Motown's property. Every dollar those songs would go on to earn belonged to the label. She walked out with no publishing, no royalties, no piece of the catalog she had helped build. She left the machine. The machine kept the music. In 1990, she was diagnosed with laryngeal cancer. She had no health insurance. The medical bills destroyed her finances. She was evicted from her home. The artists she had helped inspire, Diana Ross, Bruce Springsteen, Rod Stewart, organized a benefit fund because Motown's queen could not pay her own medical bills. She sued Motown in 1991 for royalties she believed had been withheld since 1964. Motown settled for a six-figure sum. She died the following year. Mary Wells died on July 26, 1992. She was 49 years old. Motown's first star, the voice of My Guy, dead at 49, with no health insurance, still fighting for what she was owed. This is the kind of thing that deserves to be said clearly. And we have one name left. I have been building toward this one since the first name on this list. Everything before it was true. Everything before it mattered. But this is the name I most needed you to know before this was over. This is where the pattern finds its fullest expression. Number 1, Florence Ballard. Let me tell you who Florence Ballard was before I tell you what the industry did to her. Because the distance between who she was and what she died as is the complete measure of what this list has been about. Florence Glenda Ballard was born in Detroit in 1943, the ninth of 13 children. She had a voice that studio engineers described as so powerful she had to stand 17 feet from the microphone when she was 17 years old. She formed a singing group with her childhood friend Mary Wilson. They recruited another girl from the neighborhood, a girl named Diane Ross, and called themselves the Primettes. Florence Ballard was the one who gave the Supremes their name. From a list of options, she chose Supremes. That is where the name came from. She sang on 16 top 40 singles with the group. 9 of them went to number 1. She was there for every single one of those records. Her voice is in the sound that defined Motown for a generation. And then Berry Gordy made a decision. Gordy had been positioning Diana Ross as the face of the group since 1963. Florence Ballard was the stronger singer by most accounts, including the accounts of the studio engineers who worked with both of them. But Ross was Gordy's romantic partner, and Gordy had a different vision for where Motown was going. By 1967, he had renamed the act Diana Ross and the Supremes. Florence was no longer the lead. She was barely a presence. Her last performance with the Supremes was in Las Vegas in June of 1967. She received a settlement of approximately $160,000. As part of that settlement, she was prohibited from publicly identifying herself as a former member of the Supremes. She was contractually forbidden from mentioning that she had helped build the group. She signed the document. She had no choice. She hired an attorney to manage the settlement funds. The money was gone before the decade ended. Her solo career produced nothing that charted. She sued Motown in 1971 for additional royalties. She lost. Her home was foreclosed on. Her husband left. She moved into her sister's house. By 1974, Florence Ballard was living on welfare payments of $270 a month. I know. I felt the same way when I found this. The woman who named the Supremes. The woman whose voice is on the records that built Hitsville into a $60 million business. $270 a month. 3 daughters, no car, no phone. Motown paid for her funeral when she died. Michigan law required it because her estate was insolvent. Her estate was valued at $8,000. Her debts totaled $16,000. She was 32 years old. Diana Ross and Berry Gordy attended the funeral. This is the thread I mentioned at the beginning of this list. This is where it leads. Florence Ballard's story contains every element we have described tonight. The contract designed to extract and not return, the silence enforced by legal document, the erasure made official, the poverty waiting at the end. All of it. In one person, in one story, finally told. Motown's first #1 hit was built by a girl group. Its most successful act was a girl group named by a woman who died on welfare at 32. And the label spent decades ensuring those two facts were never placed in the same sentence. We just placed them in the same sentence.